What if I told you that the bloodiest, most dramatic succession crisis in House of the Dragon, the one with dragonfire, betrayal, and family members literally eating each other alive politically, was actually the toned-down version of what really happened in medieval England? I'm serious. George R.R. Martin has openly admitted that the Dance of the Dragons was inspired by a real English civil war so brutal, so chaotic, and so absurdly petty that chroniclers literally called the period the Anarchy. Capital T, capital A. For 19 years, England tore itself apart because a bunch of lords couldn't stomach the idea of a woman sitting on the throne. Sound familiar? Except in real life, there were no actual dragons to settle the argument. Just starvation, castle sieges, blinding of prisoners, and a level of medieval savagery that would make Aemon Targaryen say, "Okay, maybe let's calm down." So today, we're going to walk through both of these succession crises side by side, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you're going to look at the Greens and the Blacks and think they had it easy. Let's start with how both of these messes began, because the parallels are honestly eerie. In House of the Dragon, King Viserys I is a decent man and a terrible politician. He names his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir, makes every lord in the realm swear oaths to support her claim, and then proceeds to spend the next 2 decades making decisions that completely undermine her position. He remarries, he has sons, he never reaffirms her claim strongly enough, and when he finally dies, the vultures don't even wait for the body to cool before they crown her half-brother Aegon instead. Now rewind to 12th century England. King Henry I had a son, William Adelin, who was absolutely going to be king. Succession was clean, simple, no drama. And then William got on a ship called the White Ship in 1120 for a boozy party cruise across the English Channel, and that ship sank. William drowned, and just like that, Henry's entire succession plan was at the bottom of the ocean. Chronicles say Henry never smiled again. What he did do was name his daughter Matilda as his heir. She was already impressive. She'd been Holy Roman Empress, she was politically experienced, and Henry made his barons swear oaths to support her. Multiple times, actually. He made them swear at least twice because apparently he knew medieval lords had the loyalty of a weather vane in a hurricane. And guess what happened when Henry died in 1135? His nephew Stephen of Blois sprinted across the Channel, grabbed the treasury at Winchester, and had himself crowned before Matilda could even pack a bag. Those oaths, worthless. The barons shrugged and said, "Well, he's here and he's a man, so I guess that works." George R.R. Martin didn't just borrow from this history. He photocopied it and added dragons. In House of the Dragon, the factions are color-coded for our convenience. The Greens support Aegon II. The Blacks support Rhaenyra. Each side has dragons, powerful allies, and an unshakable belief that God, destiny, and basic common sense are exclusively on their side. The Greens have Otto Hightower pulling strings like a medieval puppet master. The Blacks have Daemon Targaryen being Daemon Targaryen, which is both their greatest asset and their biggest liability. The Anarchy's factions weren't as neatly organized, but they were arguably more vicious. Stephen had the support of most of the English Church, the City of London, and a significant chunk of the Norman baronage. Matilda had the support of her half-brother Robert of Gloucester, who was one of the most capable military commanders in England, along with a coalition of Western barons and, crucially, her own iron will. Contemporary sources describe Matilda as proud, imperious, and absolutely unwilling to compromise. Her enemies called her haughty, her supporters called her regal. The truth is probably that she was a woman operating in a world that demanded she be twice as competent to receive half the respect, and she simply refused to perform humility for men she considered beneath her. And here's where reality gets wilder than fiction. Stephen was actually a likable guy. People genuinely enjoyed his company. He was generous, brave in battle, and absolutely hopeless as a king. He'd make a decision, then reverse it. He'd grant lands to one baron, then grant the same lands to another. He'd arrest powerful bishops, and then wonder why the church turned against him. If Aegon II is a reluctant king who didn't really want the crown, Stephen was an enthusiastic king who simply had no idea what to do with it. At least Aegon had Alicent and Otto managing things behind the scenes. Stephen just sort of vibed and hoped it would work out. The Dance of the Dragons gives us spectacular set pieces. The battle above the God's Eye, Dragonfire over King's Landing, Rhaenyra's eventual feeding to a dragon. It's brutal, it's cinematic, and it destroyed an entire generation of dragons and Targaryens alike. The Anarchy didn't have dragons, but it had something almost worse. 19 years of grinding, merciless, low-level warfare that turned England into a wasteland. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, one of our best sources for this period, contains a passage so bleak it's become one of the most famous descriptions of medieval suffering ever written. It says that during Stephen's reign, men said openly that Christ and his saints slept. Let that sink in. Things were so bad that people believed God had literally abandoned England. Castles went up everywhere. Not grand royal fortresses, but illegal adulterine castles built by local lords who used the chaos to become petty tyrants. They'd kidnap peasants and hold them for ransom. They'd torture people for their money and their grain. The Chronicle describes people being hung by their thumbs, having knotted ropes twisted around their heads, being thrown into pits full of snakes. This isn't Game of Thrones grimdark fiction. This is a primary historical source describing what actually happened to regular people. The military campaigns themselves were almost farcical. In 1141, Stephen was actually captured at the Battle of Lincoln. Matilda had him in chains. She was this close to winning the whole thing. She marched to London to be crowned, and the Londoners revolted against her because she demanded too much money. She had to flee the city before the coronation could even happen. Then Stephen's wife, also named Matilda, because apparently 12th century England had 3 names total, rallied forces, besieged Matilda's ally in Winchester, and in the resulting chaos, Robert of Gloucester was captured, so they traded prisoners. Stephen for Robert, King for Earl. And the war just kept going. In House of the Dragon, at least when someone takes King's Landing, they get to sit on the throne for a while. Real Matilda couldn't even get through the ceremony. This is where both stories become something more than just war narratives. At their core, both The Dance of the Dragons and The Anarchy are stories about what happens when a patriarchal society is confronted with a competent woman who has a legitimate claim to power. Rhaenyra was named heir by a sitting king. The lords swore to her. Her claim was, by any rational legal standard, stronger than Aegon's. But the moment the crown was available, the institutions of power defaulted to the nearest available man. The Greens didn't even pretend it was about merit. It was about tradition, about comfort, about the deeply held belief that a king was simply the natural order of things. Matilda faced the same wall, except she didn't even get the courtesy of a formal coup. Stephen just showed up and took it, and enough of the establishment went along with it because the alternative was too radical. A ruling Queen of England was unprecedented. Matilda had been Empress of the Holy Roman Empire. She'd navigated the most complex political landscape in Europe. She was overqualified. And it didn't matter. Both women were also punished for displaying the exact qualities that would have been celebrated in a man. Rhaenyra's political ambition is framed as ruthlessness. Matilda's refusal to grovel before the London merchants was called arrogance. Meanwhile, Stephen could bungle his way through nearly 2 decades of civil war and still be described by chroniclers as noble and chivalrous. The double standard is so consistent across 8 centuries that it would be funny if it weren't so infuriating. Both wars ended not with a decisive victory, but with everyone being too tired and too dead to keep fighting. In House of the Dragon, the Dance of the Dragons concludes with both sides effectively destroyed. Rhaenyra is dead. Aegon II is dead. The dragons are nearly extinct. The eventual peace comes through Rhaenyra's son Aegon III taking the throne, meaning the Blacks technically win, but at a cost so catastrophic that the word victory feels obscene. The Anarchy ended with a negotiated settlement in 1153, called the Treaty of Winchester. Stephen would remain king for the rest of his life, but Matilda's son, Henry Plantagenet, would be his heir. Stephen conveniently died the following year, and Henry became Henry II, one of the most powerful and consequential kings in English history. So just like in the fictional version, the woman's son inherits the throne. The mother does the suffering. The son gets the crown. Henry II went on to build an empire stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. He reformed English law so fundamentally that his legal innovations are still part of the common law system used in dozens of countries today, including the United States. The anarchy produced one of England's greatest monarchs, just as the dance produced a king who oversaw the slow decline of dragonkind. History was kinder in the long run, but both mothers paid a price no throne was worth. So the next time you're watching House of the Dragon and thinking that the politics couldn't possibly get more messy or more unfair, just remember that the real thing was worse. No dragons, no magic, just human cruelty, institutional sexism, and 19 years of a country eating itself alive because the men in charge couldn't fathom taking orders from a woman. George R.R. Martin added the fantasy elements, but the ugliest parts of the story, the betrayal, the broken oaths, the sidelining of legitimate female claimants, those came straight out of the history books. If this video made you see House of the Dragon a little differently, or if you just learned something new about the anarchy, smash that like button. It genuinely helps the channel more than you know. Subscribe if you want more videos breaking down the real history behind your favorite fantasy stories, and hit that bell so you don't miss the next one. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Who got the worst deal, Rhaenyra or Matilda? Which succession crisis would you less like to live through? Drop your answers below and let's argue about it like the medieval barons we all secretly are. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.